Hello, I'm Alma Angeles. We're moving to the next stage of the pandemic, and as the world resets to the new normal, we find ourselves seeking the right balance between health and livelihood, constantly adjusting the boundaries between liberty and responsibility. Here are tonight's news. First, the United States slapped sanctions on Hong Kong's leader after effectively forcing Chinese internet giants TikTok and WeChat to end all U.S. operations in a twin diplomatic commercial offensive set to grow ahead of U.S. elections. Take a look. In the toughest U.S. action on Hong Kong since Beijing imposed a security clampdown on the territory, the Treasury Department said it was freezing U.S. assets of Chief Executive Carrie Lam and 10 other senior officials. The Treasury Department announced it was freezing the U.S. assets of these people, and that includes Luo Guining, the head of the liaison office. It also accused the sanctioned individuals of being directly responsible for implementing Beijing's policies of suppression and of freedom and democratic process. The move criminalizes any U.S. financial transactions with the sanctioned officials. Today's actions send a clear message that the Hong Kong authorities' actions are unacceptable, Secretary of State Mike Pompeo said in a statement. Pompeo said China's security law, which bans subversion and other perceived offenses in Hong Kong, violated promises made by China before Britain handed back the territory in 1997. Hong Kong Commerce Secretary Edward Yao described the sanctions as savage, disproportionate, and unreasonable, warning of a potential blowback for U.S. businesses in the financial hub. And late Thursday, President Trump made good on previous threats against WeChat and TikTok, two Chinese-owned apps with major audiences that U.S. officials say pose a national security threat. In an executive order, President Trump gave Americans 45 days to stop doing business with the platforms, effectively setting a deadline for a potential under-pressure sale of TikTok to Microsoft. The move also threw into doubt the American operations of WeChat's parent firm, Tencent, a powerful player in the video gaming industry and one of the world's richest companies. The new restrictions sent Tencent shares tanking as much as 10% at one point in Hong Kong trade, wiping almost $50 billion off its market capitalization. President Trump's order claims TikTok could be used by China to track the locations of federal employees, build dossiers on people for blackmail, and conduct corporate espionage. Now, TikTok, which has repeatedly denied sharing data with Beijing, said the order was issued without any due process. The latest U.S. actions follow a protracted battle over Huawei, the Chinese network and smartphone giant, accused by President Trump of being a tool for espionage. Meanwhile, China has fired back after President Trump banned U.S. companies from doing business with the Chinese owners of WeChat and TikTok. New executive orders could bar distribution of the social media app within the U.S. in 45 days. President Trump charges that they share data with the Chinese government, but Beijing says the accusation is baseless.
美方不惜损害美国广大用户和公司的权益，将一己私利凌驾于市场原则和国际规则之上，肆意进行政治操弄和政治打压，换来的只能是自身道德滑坡、国家形象受损和国际信任赤字，最终也将自食其。
On today's other news, the death toll in the massive Beirut port explosion reached more than 150 people dead, with more than 5,000 hurt. More bodies were still found today as French rescue teams and others searched the area. With that operation underway, the head of the powerful Hezbollah militia insisted that his Iranian-backed group is not to blame.
أنا أود أن أؤكد اليوم أن أعلن وأؤكد نفيا قاطعا مطلقا حاسما جازما حازما أنه ما في شيء لنا بالمرفأ، لا في مخزن سلاح ولا في مخزن صواريخ ولا في صاروخ ولا في أي شيء من هذا القبيل. ولا في بندقية ولا في قنبلة ولا في رصاصة ولا في نترات، ما في شيء منه هذا على الإطلاق، لا مخزن ولا غير مخزن، لا حاليا ولا في الماضي ولا في السابق في الحاضر أبدا، ما في شيء منه على الإطلاق.
نحن قدام إعادة الرؤية بالنظام تبعنا، لأنه نظام التراضي.
Authorities had said a fire at the port had ignited tons of ammonium nitrate stored there for years, but President Michel Aoun said it could have been caused by an attack. President Aoun rejected calls for an international probe, while Nasrallah urged the army to investigate and announce its findings. He said the Lebanese military is in a prime position to do so because it's seen as a trusted institution by people and politicians across the spectrum. Now, across Lebanon, UN agencies said the needs are immediate and they are huge in the aftermath of the explosion that destroyed Beirut city port. Latest reports indicate that more than 150 people were dead and thousands wounded, but the figure is likely to rise as rescuers search the port for survivors still trapped following the devastating blast. UN agencies said that many people were still missing and that hospitals were overwhelmed.
80,000 and up to 100,000 children are among those whose homes were damaged or destroyed and who are now displaced. Many households have very limited water and electricity. The Asami Birth and Beyond Pediatric Unit in Karantina Hospital, which had a specialized unit treating newborns who require critical care, was totally destroyed. 16 other primary healthcare centers serving some 160,000 people have sustained some damage. 10 containers of personal protective equipment, including hundreds of thousands of gloves, gowns, masks that were just procured by the Ministry of Public Health for the COVID response, were destroyed. UNICEF's immediate priorities are to replace damaged PPE and other medical products and to procure critical supplies the health services require right now, to distribute water and hygiene materials, to reunite children separated from their families and provide psychosocial support for those dealing with shock, trauma, and bereavement.
WFP is concerned that the explosion and the damage to the port will exacerbate an already grim food security situation that has worsened because of the financial crisis and the COVID-19 pandemic. As Lebanon imports nearly 85% of its food, the severe damage to the port of Beirut could limit the flow of food supplies into the country and push food prices beyond the reach of many.
Given the impact of the massive explosion, we fear that the casualties and injured may also include refugees living in Beirut. Some of the areas severely affected by the powerful blast include neighborhoods that hosted refugees, and while we continue to assess the situation, we have received initial but yet unconfirmed reports of several deaths among refugees in Beirut. Hundreds of thousands of people have had their homes completely or partially damaged in the explosion, so the need for shelter is massive. UNHCR is making available its in-country stocks of shelter kits, plastic sheets, rub halls, and tens of thousands of other core relief items, including blankets and mattresses for immediate distribution and use.
With large swathes of Beirut unfit to live in, the country's principal port all but destroyed, and the health system on its knees, the situation is really dire. And dire was actually a word we used a month ago before this happened. Victims' calls for accountability must be heard, including through undertaking an impartial, independent, thorough and transparent investigation into the explosion. And you can hear the call for that very loud and clear on the streets in Beirut.
An Air India Express passenger jet crashed and broke in two trying to land in heavy rain in southern India. At least 18 people were killed and more than 120 hurt. Doctors and rescuers worked through bad weather just to reach the survivors. 190 passenger flight carried people who had been stranded abroad by the COVID-19 pandemic. The impact was so brutal that the nose of the Boeing 737 finished about 20 meters from the back half of the jet. Now, Aviation Minister Hardeep Singh Puri put the latest death toll at 18, and authorities said 22 people were in critical condition in hospital. The fatalities included the 2 pilots as well as 4 children. Kozhikode is considered a tricky airport as it has a tabletop runway with a steep drop at one end. Kerala has been hit by severe floods in recent days, and heavy rains had been falling for several hours at the airport as the jet landed. At least 21 people have died after 46 days of heavy rains in South Korea. Take a look. Now, it's the country's longest monsoon in 7 years, and it is causing more flooding, landslides, and evacuations on Saturday. The country's forestry agency has raised landslide warnings to its highest level in every region except the holiday island of Jeju. And Britain said it will crack down on a volume of migrants crossing the channel and called on France to help keep the numbers down. Authorities yesterday picked up at least 235 people in small boats, and that is already a one-day record. More migrants were found at sea today. British officials say organized smuggling and good summer weather are behind the increase. Last month, the interior ministers of France and Britain signed an agreement to create a new joint police intelligence unit to combat migrant traffickers and reduce the number of illegal channel crossings. Media reports claim that more than 3,400 people have made the crossing so far this year. Now, on Sunday, voters in Belarus head to the polls in the most contested elections in decades. President Alexander Lukashenko has been called Europe's last dictator, and he has led Belarus with an iron fist for 26 years and accused of human rights abuses, stifling dissent, and running sham elections. But now he faces an unprecedented challenge. The opposition is led by a woman.
Anymore. If we see that our president has won in these honest elections, we will step away. Okay, it means that the majority supports him. But if we will see that alternative candidate has won, so just step away peacefully and give us our right to move forward with new leader. It's very simple.
Political novice Svetlana Tikhановskaya has emerged as the rising star of the opposition in her ex-Soviet nation ruled by Lukashenko since 1994 and sometimes described as Europe's last dictatorship. Sandwiched between European Union member states and Russia, Belarus is often described as Europe's last dictatorship and still has the death penalty. In Minsk, meanwhile, many Belarusians said they hoped polls would lead to change, while some said they feared violent reprisals. In the run-up to Sunday's vote, Lukashenko has sought to galvanize support for his rule by warning of outside threats and raising the specter of violent mobs. He has warned of a plotted massacre in Minsk and foreign-funded cyber campaigns aimed at inciting color revolutions. In the past, he has crushed protests with riot police and hefty jail terms, prompting Western sanctions. But he said he would accept the outcome of the vote, but asked for a chance to save the country. In other news, Mauritius announced that oil was leaking from a bulk carrier that had run aground in the southeast of the island, sparking fears among green campaigners of an environmental disaster. The carrier, belonging to a Japanese company but Panamanian flagged, ran aground on July 25 and its crew was evacuated safely. The ship was empty at the time but was carrying 200 tons of diesel and 3,800 tons of bunker fuel, according to the local press. Shipping website say the Wakashio was built in 2007 with gross tonnage of 101,000 tons and deadweight tonnage of 203,000 tons and a length of 984 feet. Now, the grounding happened at Point Destiny, which is listed under the Ramsar Convention of Wetlands of International Importance, and near the Marine Park of Blue Bay. Anti-pollution systems have been sent to the two sites, according to the ministry, adding that the government was asking the French Indian Ocean island of La Réunion for assistance. Eagle News will be right back.
Mula noon hanggang ngayon, gabay natin ang MTRCB ratings sa matalino at responsableng panonood. Sa tamang pagsunod sa MTRCB ratings, ginagawa nating ligtas at makabuluhan ang panonood ng bawat miyembro ng pamilyang Pilipino. Lumipas man ang panahon hanggang may pamilyang Pilipino, andyan ang MTRCB.
The Philippines plunged into recession after its biggest quarterly contraction on record, according to data, as the economy reels from the coronavirus lockdowns that have wrecked businesses and thrown millions out of work. Gross domestic product shrank at 16.5% on year in the second quarter, according to the Philippine Statistics Authority, when the country endured one of the world's longest stay-at-home orders to slow the spread of the virus that has devastated economies globally. It also followed a revised 0.7% contraction in the first 3 months of the year and marked the biggest reduction in economic activity since records began in 1981. It is the country's first recession in 3 decades. Presidential spokesman Harry Roque dismissed the suggestions to extend the MECQ, admitting that the Philippine economy will not be able to withstand the impact of a longer quarantine.
Tatapatin ko po kayo, hindi na po kaya ng ekonomiya ang mas matagalang pang lockdown. Lalabas po ngayon ang figura ng second quarter GDP growth natin. Napakataas po, napakatindi po ng binaba ng ating ekonomiya. Kaya nga po ang aming mensahe sa ating taong bayan, kinakailangan po ingatan ng ating kalusugan para po tayo ay makapaghanap buhay. Mahirap na po ang mangyayari sa ating ekonomiya kung magla-lockdown na po tayo muli. Nandun na po tayo sa punto na marami po ang siguro nga po mapapabagal ng husto ang COVID-19, pero habang wala pong hanap buhay, paano naman po mabubuhay ang mga ordinaryo mga mamamayan? Ang problema po ngayon sa 2 linggo ng lockdown, saan po makakakuha ng ayuda dahil nga po wala ng batas na naipasa ang Kongreso. Sana po maihabol yan sa Bayanihan 2, pero hindi po ganun kadali ang desisyon na mag-lockdown. Ang nais lang po natin ngayon talaga, ingatan po natin ang ating kalusugan para po tayong lahat ay makapaghanap buhay. Sabi po ng WHO, tatagal pa po ang problema ng COVID-19. At dahil tatagal nga po ito, kinakailangan matuto tayo na mabuhay na naririyan ng COVID-19, ipagpatuloy ang ating mga hanap buhay at the same time, pinag-iingatan ang ating kalusugan.
To pay the bill.
The U.S. economy is getting back some of the jobs lost during the start of the pandemic and the shutdowns that followed. But the job growth seems to be slowing. Millions still don't have work yet, and many are feeling the pain. Take a look.
Well, I lost my job on April 8, 2020, and I've been applying unemployment. I got the first check. I'm still struggling to pay the bill, and I'm still looking for a job. Yeah. And they tell me to look for a job, but I'm still looking for a job. And nowadays, it's hard to find a job because everything is closed. How can you find a job, and how can you make a weekly claim if everything is closed.
But we're living in unusual times. You know, businesses have been shut down. People are losing their jobs. People are, so people got to feed their families.
Because of the pandemic right now, there are so many people that are unemployed. There are so many homeless people that's in the neighborhood.
The report showed that U.S. economy added 1.8 million jobs in July, far fewer than in May and June. Meanwhile, the unemployment rate fell to 10.2% from 11.1%, also better than consensus expectations. However, that still leaves the unemployment rate at slightly worse than the depth of the global financial crisis in October of 2000, and fewer than half of the 22 million payroll jobs lost during the pandemic have been regained. Many have also lost financial aid and benefits. President Trump announced he had ordered a 10% tariff on Canadian aluminum be reimposed, saying America's key trading partner was flooding the U.S. market with the metal. In Ottawa, Deputy Prime Minister Chrystia Freeland called the tariffs unwarranted and unacceptable and vowed to swiftly impose dollar-for-dollar countermeasures. Take a look.
Workers. 7 months ago, my administration agreed to lift those tariffs in return for a promise from the Canadian government that its aluminum industry would not flood our country with exports and kill all our aluminum jobs, which is exactly what they did. Canadian aluminum producers have broken that commitment, and the U.S. Trade Representative Robert Lighthizer has advised me that this step to reimpose tariffs is absolutely necessary to defend our aluminum industry.
Let me start by saying how much I regret that Canada is, once again, dealing with a U.S. trade action aimed at the Canadian aluminum industry and Canadian aluminum workers. At a time when we are fighting a global pandemic, working on both sides of the Canada-U.S. border to prevent loss of life and preserve jobs, a trade dispute is the last thing anyone needs. It will only hurt the economic recovery on both sides of the border.
The move, which prompted Canada to pledge retaliation, reignites trade tensions with a key partner just months after the adoption of a new North American free trade. The tariffs, which take effect on August 16, are in response to what Washington called a 27% surge in aluminum imports from Canada over the past year, which, quote, threatens to harm domestic aluminum production. He said, I have determined that the measures agreed upon with Canada are not providing an effective alternative means to address the threat and impairment to our national security from imports of aluminum from Canada. And Ottawa has long rejected that national security concerns coming from a close ally, and the two nations have been joined in a free trade since 1994. The new USMCA, or United States America-Canada Agreement Pact, came into force on July 1. Canada's Prime Minister Justin Trudeau declined to travel to Washington to join in the USMCA launch ceremony early last month after President Trump floated the idea of again hitting the country with the tariffs. And Canadian Prime Minister Justin Trudeau also weighed in late Thursday, saying on Twitter that we will always stand up for our aluminum workers. We did so in 2018, and we will stand up for them again now. The U.S. slapped import tariffs on Canadian steel and aluminum in 2018 before removing them last year as part of a broad free trade deal now in force. Canada retaliated that time with $16.6 billion in tariffs on U.S. products, including ketchup, ballpoint pens, licorice, orange juice, whiskey, and toilet paper. At the time, too, Canada focused on products that would cause pain in the electoral districts held by key Republicans, something that could be done again given the U.S. election is only 3 months away. Now, Ottawa will hit American aluminum products with $3.6 billion Canadian dollars in counter tariffs. Again, here's Deputy Prime Minister Chrystia Freeland.
The final tariffs that we impose will be, as I said, perfectly reciprocal, dollar for dollar, and the total amount will be $3.6 billion. These tariffs are unnecessary, unwarranted, and entirely unacceptable. They should not be imposed. Let me be clear. Canadian aluminum is in no way a threat to U.S. national security, which remains the ostensible reason for these tariffs. Any American who buys a can of beer or of soda, or a car or a bike, will suffer. In fact, the very washing machines manufactured at the Whirlpool plant, where the president made his announcement yesterday, will become more expensive for Americans and less competitive with machines produced elsewhere in the world as a result of these tariffs. Canada will respond swiftly and strongly in defense of our workers. We will impose dollar-for-dollar countermeasures in a balanced and perfectly reciprocal retaliation. We will not escalate, and we will not back down. As I said, what is so paradoxical about all of this is that the U.S. tariffs on Canadian aluminum exports to the U.S. will, in the first instance, hurt Americans themselves. And I am confident, as we were last time around, that ultimately common sense will prevail. I just hope that happens sooner rather than later. Mercedes, I think what this announcement yesterday says is that this U.S. administration is the most protectionist administration in U.S. history.
Eagle News will be right back. Welcome back. New Zealand's Prime Minister Jacinda Ardern kicks off her Labour Party's election campaign, riding high in the opinion polls after a successful response to the coronavirus outbreak. Take a look.
I am announcing today that if Labour is returned to government, we will roll out a support package to assist businesses in employing up to 40,000 New Zealanders whose employment is impacted by COVID-19. We went into COVID with lower debt relative to GDP than almost any other nation. And we look to come out in a better position than Australia, the UK, Canada, and the US. Keeping debt low is important to us, and we have shown that. But that need not be at the expense of health and education, and it shouldn't mean leaving people behind. When people ask, is this a COVID election? My answer is yes, it is. But that does not mean that there aren't still choices to be made. It does not mean there aren't ideas to be debated, policies to be released, manifestos to be discussed. In fact, it's the very reason why this election is more important than ever. For our small businesses, for our economy, and for our recovery. To grab hold of the opportunities that lie in front of us. So let's keep going, let's keep rebuilding, and let's keep moving.
Now, Ardern's popularity as preferred prime minister, often referred to as Jacinda Mania, topped 60% in the latest surveys following her leadership through the Christchurch mosque attacks, the White Island volcanic eruption, and the pandemic. Before the virus forced New Zealand to seal its borders, the polls had pointed to a cliffhanger election on September 19, but support swung sharply towards the center-left Labour Party as the country eliminated community transmission in a matter of months. Now, in a country of 5 million people, New Zealand has had only 22 COVID-19 deaths, and it has been 99 days since the last recorded case of infection from an unknown source. As new cases of COVID-19 continue to increase in Hawaii, state officials have made a last-minute adjustment on how public schools will start the new school year. Alfred Acenas has more on this, plus a recap on recent events in his part of the world.
Hawaii's Department of Education this past Friday announced a modification to reopening plans for all public schools throughout Oahu Island in order to align with new safeguards and restrictions prompted by the increasing number of COVID-19 cases throughout the island. Starting on August 17, all Oahu public schools will be implementing full distance or virtual learning models. Faculty will train and prepare for this last-minute modification this coming week. DOE has also designed 3 phases for these schools throughout this island. Phase 1 will involve in-person training, and this will last from August 17 to 20. During the first week of school, students will physically return to campus on a coordinated and scheduled basis, determined by each individual school to connect with their teacher, receive training on the distance learning platforms, and address issues with connectivity and access to technology. Phase 2 involves Ready to Learn, which lasts from August 24 to September 11. For the remainder of the initial 4-week period, full distance learning will be implemented. Staff will report to their designated work sites for continued distance learning instruction. And the last phase, phase 3, which is a transition to blended learning, which will begin on September 14, Education Department will continue to closely monitor the situation and work with the Governor's Office as well as the Hawaii Department of Health, or DOH, to assess whether or not students can safely return to schools to conduct in-person learning. If distance learning will continue for the remainder of the first quarter, an announcement will be made on September 8. Now, schools on Kauai, Maui, and the Big Island will still reopen as originally scheduled on August 17, also with blended models. Here now is Superintendent Dr. Christina Kishimoto.
I appreciate the support and shared commitment of this plan from Governor David Ige, Health Director Bruce Anderson, State Epidemiologist Dr. Sarah Park, and Mayor Kurt Caldwell in accepting this proposal from our Oahu school leaders. Our complex area superintendents on Oahu pulled this plan together collaboratively. I'd like to address our public school students. You have been at the heart of every decision we faced. We know you are eager to see your teachers and friends again. We are excited to welcome you back and continue your education journey. And to our public school parents, please know that we remain committed to educating your children with high-quality learning opportunities.
As of this report, the Aloha State has reported 201 new cases of COVID-19, 200 alone on this island of Oahu and 1 on Maui, bringing to a statewide total of 3,115. Unfortunately, 2 more Oahu residents, both with pre-existing conditions and elderly, have lost their battle to the virus, resulting in a statewide total of 31. And just to recap the events for this week in this part of the world, and to recall, last weekend, the state government had encountered some reporting delays, which resulted to low case count initially, but had to be corrected the following Monday, which averaged about close to 100 or more per day. Also, this past Thursday, Governor David Ige announced the reinstatement of the 14-day mandatory self-quarantine for all inter-island travelers, particularly for those coming from this island to the other islands. Following that announcement by the governor, Honolulu Mayor Kirk Caldwell made the decision to close, once again, to close all beaches and parks throughout this island, beginning today up until September 4. Reporting from Honolulu, Hawaii, I'm Alfred Asenas, Eagle News. We live in interesting times. Back to you.
Thank you, Alfred. Dr. Anthony Fauci, the country's leading infectious disease specialist, said there should not be a one-size-fits-all model for kids returning to school. Let's listen in.
And you have an explosion. The issue with schools is really important. So I would say that as a 40,000-foot default principle is that we should try to the best of our ability to open the schools for the following reasons. A, the detrimental effects on children who are kept out of school, psychologically and otherwise. And B, the downstream unintended ripple effects that go beyond the children and go to the parents who may need to interrupt their work to take care of the children who are no longer in school. That's a fundamental principle. We should try as best as possible to get the kids back to school. But there's a big however in that. And the however is paramount has to be the safety and the welfare and the health of the children and the teachers, and secondarily to the parents who are dealing with the children. So I think you started off your question perfect. We live in a big country, and we don't have a country that's unidimensional. There are different levels of infection in different parts of the country. I think to say every child has to go back to school is not really realizing the fact that we have such a diversity of viral activity. There may be some sections of the country where the viral activity is so low you don't have to do anything different. You could just send the children back to school. There are some areas where the level may be low but not absent and maybe a little troublesome. You might want to modify the schedule. A hybrid, part online, part in person, morning, afternoon. So you can't make one statement about bringing children back to school in this country. It depends on where you are, and we've got to be very flexible.
New York Governor Andrew Cuomo told reporters on Friday that schools will be reopening, citing his state's success in battling the virus, with schools planning for a part-time approach. The state averages 3 daily new cases per 100,000, placing it in the yellow category on the Harvard dashboard, meaning schools can open with a robust testing plan. Elementary and high school students return to class in the city of Enterprise in the southern U.S. state of Alabama as the coronavirus pandemic continues across the country. In Mississippi, the state with the country's highest positivity rate, at 22% of everyone tested, sick or otherwise, the Corinth School District has so far seen 8 confirmed cases across several schools, according to officials. And as a result, over 100 people who came into close contact with them have been asked to quarantine swiftly, disrupting local authorities' plans for a return to normal. Several other large cities, including Chicago, Houston, Los Angeles, and Miami, have announced they will stick to distance learning for now. But Republican-led states of Mississippi, Georgia, Tennessee, and Indiana opened this week and last. Meanwhile, just days after schools in the German state of Mecklenburg, Western Pomerania became the first to reopen full-time after the summer break, some 800 students are forced to head home from the Goethe Gymnasium and Ludwigslust after a teacher tests positive. Now, separately, 100 pupils from a primary school in Rostock district are placed under quarantine for 2 weeks after a pupil was confirmed infected. Now again, Dr. Anthony Fauci, the nation's top infectious disease specialist, answered some questions from Harvard Chan faculty and other COVID-19 experts. A conversation moderated by Dr. Sanjay Gupta, the chief medical correspondent for CNN. He was asked why some people who get COVID are sicker even if they don't have any underlying disease. Let's listen in.
Is it still random, or do you have any better idea as to why some of these other patients get so sick?
Yeah. The answer is we have some clear idea, and there's still some things that are unknown. So in the typical biological world that you and I live in, there's the famous bell-shaped curve, okay? So if the big part of the bell is the people you know have a higher degree of likelihood of a serious outcome. The elderly and those with the underlying conditions that we know so well, predominantly diabetes, obesity, hypertension, cardiovascular disease, kidney disease, etc. They have a much higher likelihood. You look at the data nails that down. 90+% of the people who die are over a certain age. Then you get the people on the tails of the bell-shaped curve. And that is the people who are young, seemingly healthy, and we're seeing more and more of them who get a serious outcome to the point that they get hospitalized and sometimes die. I have to tell you without any name, I have even close to me in the brother of a very close relative of mine, was a 32-year-old young man, vibrant man, otherwise healthy, got a typical coronavirus infection, got symptoms, developed a cardiomyopathy, and died. That happens. That just happens. There's no doubt. But that doesn't mean that there are individuals there who are not going to suffer like the person I'm referring to. However, we don't know why. I mean, if the person had diabetes or obesity, good explanation. But some people are otherwise perfectly normal. Is that a genetic thing? Don't know. Is that a big expression of ACE2 receptors in their airway and in their lungs? Could be. We don't know yet. And that's where I say, Sanjay, we've got to be humble that we don't know. We can give the possibilities, but we don't know.
These things that we talk about like this, and this will come up a couple more times, are they knowable and we just don't know yet? This gets back to the intricacies of science. Again, when you say this 34, and I'm sorry to hear about your friend's brother, I have a friend, a nurse that I know as well, 34 years old, who died. And the question that comes up, I think, from families, obviously, and people, was there any way to have known, predict? You're saying no at this point, we don't know, but is it knowable? Will we know at one point that 30-year-old, despite all their other fine medical history, is vulnerable to this disease?
You know, it could be genetic. It could be, we know from good studies that there are certain infections that some individuals can lead a perfectly normal life so long as they don't come into contact with a particular pathogen. It isn't every pathogen. You know, and I know, and probably many of the viewers, that if you have a true immunodeficiency, there are multiple infections that you are susceptible to. But there are some genetic polymorphisms where you have a defect that would never bother you at all unless you came into contact with a particular virus, like a herpes virus or whatever, and then all hell breaks loose. It could be that, and we could find that out with enough clinical experience.
The Tokyo Metropolitan Government said 429 new cases of the coronavirus were confirmed as of 3 p.m. local time on Saturday. The daily tally in the capital has topped 400. This is the second day in a row. It also marked the 12th consecutive day that the country has reported more than 200 infections. The accumulated number of infections in Tokyo now stands at 15,536. Saturday is the beginning of the Bon summer holidays in Japan, and the Tokyo governor has urged people to stay home. And finally, in our news, the Iglesia Ni Cristo in New Zealand held a virtual choral competition, and the officials conveyed their 106th anniversary greetings. Greg Bessa reports.
Despite the deepening economic and social impact caused by months of lockdown and the continuing threat of COVID-19 pandemic in New Zealand, members of the Iglesia Ni Cristo Church of Christ have found a meaningful way to celebrate the 106th founding anniversary of the church. As the COVID-19 pandemic is continually wreaking havoc in the economies of many countries and is resulting to the death of thousands of people around the world, it did not hinder the entirety of the Iglesia Ni Cristo Church of Christ to celebrate its 106th founding anniversary on 27th of July of this year. On the part of the members of the church in New Zealand, they utilized the modern telecommunication technology to hold their first ever virtual choral competition entitled Songs of Salvation. Pre-recorded musical performances from congregations around the country were live-streamed through the WebEx social platform to the members of the church who were delighted to watch such historic online musical competition from their respective households. As if they were performing live in front of thousands of spectators, participating choral groups were all dressed up, wore personal protective equipment, and even observed social distancing in accordance to the contest guidelines. They rendered their musical entries with conviction, which conveyed the messages of love, hope, and faith the members of the church are firmly believing into and are serving as inspiration for them to go on amid the surging of the deadly virus across the globe. Much as members of the church were united in celebrating the anniversary, they manifested once more the gratitude to the church administration for allowing them to hold the virtual choral competition.
Today, we join our brethren all around the globe in celebrating another milestone of the Church of Christ, which we truly cherish and love, the 106th anniversary of its establishment in the Philippines. We continue to give thanks to our Almighty God and to our Lord Jesus Christ, and express our profound gratitude to our Executive Minister, Brother Eduardo V. Manalo, and to the overall coordinator of the Christian Family Organizations, Brother Angelo Eranio V. Manalo, for giving us this great opportunity to have this momentous and historical event dubbed as Songs of Salvation Choral Competition online. And this activity, we will proclaim not only our gratitude and thanksgiving through the songs that our brethren have prepared, but also our solemn promises to remain strong, steadfast, and firm in our faith in God, in our Lord Jesus Christ, and our love of our holy election. We will also reaffirm our vow to maintain and keep our hope of the salvation and the dwelling in the holy city that God has promised us. Through this very special and historical activity, we will prove to our Lord God and to our Lord Jesus Christ and our executive minister that despite the current situation of the world, the hardship, affliction, and danger brought not only by the COVID-19 pandemic, but also by the calamities, wickedness, and troubles happening around the globe, that we truly place our complete hope in the grace that God has promised us, like what is stated in our theme for the 106th year anniversary of the church. Put all your hope in the grace that will be yours.
To our dearest Executive Minister, Brother Eduardo V. Manalo, and to our CFO Coordinator, Brother Angelo Eranio V. Manalo, we would like to thank you po for the approval of this activity, Songs of Salvation. We promise you po, we promise also to our Lord God that we will be active in all of the church activities launched by the church administration. Happy 106th anniversary po.
On the other hand, a number of officials to and in New Zealand send their anniversary greetings to the church administration and to all members of the church in different parts of the world.
We would like to greet the Executive Minister,
Brother Eduardo V. Manalo, and to the members of the Iglesia ni Cristo all over the world, happy 106th anniversary.
Po ay malugod na bumabati ng isang maligayang pagdiriwang sa pagsapit ng ika-106 na taong anibersaryo ng Iglesia.
Congratulations to all of the members of the Church of Christ on your 106-year anniversary since the founding of the Church. A very special warm greetings from New Zealand.
Greeting all the members of the Iglesia ni Cristo Church in New Zealand and throughout the world, especially your Executive Minister, Eduardo V. Manalo. Congratulations po, 106 years, what an achievement, what a blessing.
Wish you on behalf of the New Zealand Government my warmest wishes for your 106th anniversary.
Church Executive Minister, Brother Eduardo V. Manalo, and the whole congregation of Iglesia ni Cristo, a happy anniversary on their 106th anniversary.
I'd just like to say a big 106th anniversary to Iglesia ni Cristo, Church of Christ here in Lower Hutt and across the world. Wishing you all the best here and looking forward to another 106 years.
From our household,
to the Church's Executive Minister, Brother Eduardo V. Manalo,
and to all the members around the world,
a happy 106th anniversary. From Wainumarta, Hutt Valley, Wellington Region, New Zealand, this is Greg Besa. We live in interesting times.
Thank you, Greg. In time of physical and emotional distance, we give importance to the unsung service delivered by our frontliners. Our news correspondents positioned all over the world. Without them, we would not have the eagle-eye focus on the facts of this pandemic and its continuing repercussions on our lives. To our international correspondents, thank you for staying in touch with our viewers. Stay safe, protect yourselves and others. Good night, Amalma Angeles. We live in interesting times.